Fort Manoel, an imposing example of 18th century French military architecture, named after the Grand Master Antonio Manuel de Villena. Grand Master de Villena left a lasting and impressive legacy after the 1720s, with an ambitious building plan across Malta, including the renovation of Indina and its fortifications, and plans to build beautiful Baroque buildings in Valletta, including the Manoel Theatre. The foundation stone of the fort was laid on the 14th of September 1723 by de Villena, having actually financed the project himself due to the order's financial difficulties at the time. The project was completed well into the 1730s. It stands today as Villena's proudest achievement during his 14-year reign on Malta. Fort Manoel was built to reinforce the safety of Valletta, using original designs updated by the French architect Charles-François de Mondion, the military engineer of the order and a skilled designer of both martial and civic structures, which were both incorporated into the design of the fort. The way that Fort Manoel is constructed makes it truly unique. The fort is actually carved into the limestone rock, rather than built on top of it. In fact, the stone that was carved out to make the ditch was actually used to build the fortifications themselves. That's sustainability as far back as the 18th century. Other than its functional purpose, Fort Manoel also stands as a shining example of Baroque architecture. A combination of engineering, architecture, and art come together, giving a sense of power and glory. In fact, the unusual raked and wide-open piazza was designed as such in order to be admired by the people from Valletta, as though it were a set on a stage. The rake peaks with the cupola of the Chapel of St. Anthony of Padua, giving it a prominent position in order for it to be visible from all around. These design elements are unusual for 18th century forts, which were built strictly as machines of defense, walled in and invisible from outside the walls, as is Fort St. Elmo, for example. Here lies the beauty of Fort Manoel. While delivering on its purpose as a defense mechanism, it also gives a sense of grandeur and glory. Over time, Fort Manoel has taken on various uses and occupants, having had parts demolished, such as the Polverista on St. Anthony's Bastion, which was removed by the British military and replaced by one of their gun placements. The landside back gate and bridge are also not part of the original design, but were added during the British period to allow for the easy transportation of artillery in and out of the fort. During World War II, the fort was subjected to numerous air raids which saw the almost complete destruction of its charming chapel. Over the years, illegal structures were added by squatters, and Fort Manoel fell victim to pillage, vandalism, and decay. Over 2.5 centuries later, in the year 2000, the MIDI Consortium took over responsibility of the preservation of Fort Manoel. Headed by Professor Alex Torpiano, the restoration team of the architectural firm AOM Partnership traced the immense heritage through an intensive research initiative. This led them to public and private collections of architectural plans, journals, and photographs, even taking them overseas to the historical archives in the United Kingdom. With an investment of over €20 million, MIDI's preservation of Fort Manoel was the first comprehensive, large-scale restoration project of its kind, and is considered to be the largest preservation initiative ever undertaken by a private company in Malta. In fact, it instigated other private and public preservation projects across the Maltese islands. As with many restoration and preservation projects, the dilemma lay in deciding what was of historical value and what was part of the long-gone fabric. Where does one draw a line? A consensus was reached, and since the fort was heavily bombed in World War II, a line was drawn on the 1st of November 1941, the day the bombs started to fall. Anything added to the fort after that date was removed, and anything that was there before was reconstructed, where possible. By the end of 2010, all structures and open areas and much of the fort's enceinte were fully restored. Most interesting of which was the reconstruction of the chapel of St. Anthony of Padua, De Velena's patron saint. Again, based on intense research, photographic evidence, and few available architectural drawings, reconstruction began with the clearing and sorting of the chapel remains to determine what could be reintegrated into the reconstruction and what was irreparable. This led to a lucky find of decorative masonry remains buried in what was once the sacristy. During the 1950s, the British commander of the fort, Captain Brockman, also happened to be a Maltese history enthusiast and took it upon himself to clear the remains of the chapel and to try and salvage what was left. He buried some of the remains in the sacristy, hiding them away from pillagers, conserving them so that they may be enjoyed today. The original masonry was carefully unearthed and incorporated into the reconstruction. The chapel also includes a crypt where de Mondion, the fort's designer, is said to have been buried. Captain Brockman had discovered the crypt while clearing the site of the chapel. He confirms having found human remains which were identifiable as members of the order through medallions and inscriptions. The captain restored as much as he could, reburied the dead, and relaid the floor. Unfortunately, Fort Manoel fell into total abandonment after 1969, and many historical items were pillaged and vandalized, including the commemorative plaques in the crypt and the tombstone of de Mondion. In 2010, as part of the Midi Preservation Project, Fondazione Wirtartna oversaw the archaeological investigations of the crypt, where human remains dating back to the 19th century were found. Once the chapel was fully restored and before the finial above the lantern on the chapel's roof was put in place, a stonemason inserted a small box into the mortar. Inside it is a dated list of the names of some of Malta's most skilled craftsmen, who in some way participated in this historical project. A medallion of St. Anthony of Padua and present-day coins. The date of completion was later engraved on the lantern. The barracks surrounding the piazza were also fully restored to their former glory. These barracks being somewhat of a novelty and a luxury in their time, as troops would usually sleep in the damp of the ramparts. But not here at Fort Manoel. The troops had the luxury of space, ventilation and shade, even facilities. The remaining polverista on the right bastion of St. Helena has also been fully restored. Based on a French design, both polveristas were built to be bomb-proof and fireproof, and damp-proof in the way that they were ventilated, including raised flooring to avoid rising damp, which would have damaged the gunpowder. Again, a feat of French military engineering for its time. The most recent part of the fort's preservation work involved the couvre-port and its drawbridge mechanism, recreated as an exact replica. The moat under the drawbridge was cleared out to enable the original bridge's flip mechanism. The magnificent Baroque main gate was purposely built to create awe and to subdue the illiterate local society, covering it in symbolism that pertained to the Grand Master. A commemorative plaque, family emblems, his initials AMV, which had disappeared and have been reinstated today, as well as a replica of his bronze bust which now sits above the couvre-port, where the original was, up until the early 1960s, when it was moved to the Manoel Theatre. The replica was commissioned by Midi and cast by Christopher and Joseph Ketkuti of Ketkuti Foundry in Loa. The Midi Restoration Project has brought Fort Manoel back to life, preserving this important part of our heritage. The project is by no means over. Preservation is ongoing and will extend past the fortifications as the project progresses.